more activity in Egypt, or specifically in Sinai Peninsula, that has been happening since October 7, and especially in the last few days, few weeks, few months. Now, there is a question on is this something extraordinary? Is this something that might uh, sort of point towards some sort of action from the Egyptian side to Israel? There already have been few things in the past, and whenever there was a war between Egypt and Israel, it was always started from the Egyptian side by doing something in Sinai or Sinai. So today we'll discuss some of the things that have been happening in the recent past, from or since October 7, as well as some of the history of how we even got here. Now, joining me today are Marco and Richard. Welcome to the reality show. And I'll start with you, Marco, immediately. We can discuss a little bit just the sort of military activity. So, as I said, there have been some chatter about more activity happening in Sinai. Now, officially, Egypt is saying it's to fight or to do counterterrorism or to fight extremism in Sinai, and Israel hasn't made that many responses. So basically, just to explain, when it comes to Sinai and military of Egyptians in Sinai, there is the peace deal between Egypt and Israel that warrants that any sort of action from Egypt have to be sort of made, or Israel has to be made aware of it, and there has to be some coordination. So just to clarify that. But yeah, Marco, what do you make of last few events?
Yeah, well, first of all, the Sinai Peninsula is the bit of land that separates effectively Israel from the main African body of Egypt, and it's Egyptian land within the territory of Egypt itself, and it's right on the Red Sea with access to the Suez Canal. It's of strategic importance for Israel because through it they can actually reach the Suez Canal and Indian Ocean from there. So strategically, commercially, it's very important for Israel. That's why it's been a bone of contention for since Israel was formed, really. Now. We know, for example, that the Six-Day War in '67 was caused by effectively Egypt blocking the Strait of what's it called, Tiran, which is on the Red Sea, and causing some sort of concern for Israel in terms of their military build up and those kind of stuff. And that's why Israel had a preemptive strike when it looked like there was no solution there, and it looked like Egypt was going to attack them. Now something similar seem to happen. There's definitely been a huge increase in the spending in military equipment and especially tanks and troops, which have been piled up on the Sinai Peninsula for the last couple of years. But it's very hard to tell what Egypt is doing. Egypt is again, like most Middle Eastern states are kind of Mickey Mouse countries. They sort of survive as independent states, but they are heavily subsidized, in particular by the United States. The United States are effectively subsidizing the defense industry by giving big grants to Egypt so that they can buy U.S. Weaponry, U.S.-made weaponry. So the whole thing is a bit dubious. But what it actually looks like, it's more like probably Egypt is renovating its armed forces. There are, of course, they have very old equipment, very old machinery. So probably all they're doing is, just spending a bit of money that the US give them in order to have a bit more up-to-date equipment. Now, we don't know for sure what the intentions are. And by the suggestion that they're making about Gaza, it doesn't really sound like they really want to go to war either. So I don't know. It's hard to tell. Hopefully, it's not going to be the case because I think it would be heavily misjudged on their behalf. I mean, Israel is in no mood of carrying on with having threat on its border. So we will see. But to be honest, it doesn't look as bad as it sounds. Hopefully.
I mean, there is a regional shift going on in the Middle East at the moment. Obviously, everybody's thinking about what the next decade, the next couple of decades are going to mean, particularly as all the dynamics have changed in terms of which countries are strong at the moment. I mean, to Marco's point about the US military aid, I mean, the US gives 1.3 billion a year to Egypt, which is like the second largest after Israel, and of course that is to buy military equipment. And I think you can certainly make the case, as Marco just mentioned there, that it's to improve the outdated equipment that they've had for some time. But of course, one of the things you have to factor into this is how short Egypt's period of democracy has been. I mean, it had Mubarak for 30 years up until the Arab Spring. This is the third term of Al-Sisi. He's been there since 2014 after the Muslim Brotherhood and
It's
Morsi and all
popular.
that. Yeah, popular, maybe, yes, yes. I mean, he's set to be there till the end of the decade, as things stand. So this is supposed to be his last term, but of course, we'll see whether it is or not. And of course, what one thing that may be a factor, building up your military may relate to that. It may not. I don't want to suggest it does, but of course, the plan that they've got or that they've put on the table for Gaza, which we'll also get into, I'm sure, in the course of this episode, also outlines a different kind of vision to what obviously what Trump and what the US have outlined so far. Now, I think any country in the Middle East has got to be concerned about whether its own who its allies are within the area and how those dynamics have changed because it can no longer rely to the same extent on old friends as before, and maybe there are new enemies as well. So shifting sands is the theme.
Just a quick point on the sort of the democracy aspect of Egypt, because people, whenever people try to talk about sort of just having democracy, is like it's such a tough thing to have like a proper system or like a proper democratic processes even, and I think it really relies on a specific state of mind of the people, specific philosophy even among the people. It's not just about having some processes. It reminds me a bit of my own country right now, where the government is using pretty much every tool they have to go against the idea of some separation of power, some democratic systems, and many people applaud those sort of like populist, authoritarian aspects. And it's like, if you don't have a population that understands what, rather than democracy, some amount of like republican system, some amount of like separation of powers, what it means and what the purpose is. It's like, yeah, you can have elections, and then you have like Russia, when Putin has been always elected, and when he couldn't be more elected, well, you just get like a different guy instead of him. And it's like, yeah, unless you have, and you know even authoritarianism when it comes to Putin. But yeah, unless you understand what a real country requires, like the fact that you have elections is not enough. I mean, Palestinians had elections and they voted for first Fatah, the terrorist organization, or rather a PLO, I should say, and then Hamas, another terrorist organization.
Well,
So
Egypt in 2011, after the Arab Spring, they got rid of Mubarak. And who do they go and elect? They are Muslim Brotherhood in the person of Morsi. So there you go. The first time they given free election, I mean, freer than they were before, they end up going out for a Islamic party. So
But your
yeah,
point's well made. I mean, certainly the fact that democracy doesn't stand for freedom or for individual rights, and yet people stop at the processes and think if you can just have set up some elections, it's
yeah.
job done. And of course, that's sort of comes at the end of the process, really, rather than at the start. but it's certainly only one piece of the overall puzzle. And probably worth mentioning that al-Sisi at his last election, when he was elected for the third term, got nearly 90% of the vote. Now, for any leader to get nearly 90% in the third term, it always makes me a little bit suspicious that, how democratic is this place? Because no matter how loved and successful they are, 90% is a hell of a threshold to be reaching.
Yeah, and you always see that in Western countries when it comes to approval ratings of politicians, they like barely have like 50% that like got elected when it comes to sort of even being popular. But let me take a little bit because there was some official confirmation on this. So there have been some reports earlier that Hamas is going to release 8 hostages on Saturday and also 4 dead bodies on Thursday. Now it looks like Hamas is reporting that among the 4 bodies released on Thursday are going to be Kafir and Ariel Bibas as well as their mother. So now we still don't know 100% sure, but if it's true, this is truly terrible. It's something that we have been expecting, especially since they were not released in the sort of first few rounds that they were supposed to. But it still shows, the terrible state that like, or sort of, people should realize what like Hamas is, and people still don't. And yeah, I'm not even sure if there will be anything big coming out of it. Now, the last time that Hamas tried to delay the release, Trump threatened certain things. Now, if this gets released, we might see something more, as well as maybe something more from Israeli side, because it was mainly the Israeli side that in the last release refused to break up the ceasefire and didn't do anything about the Hamas violations. So Hamas has already in the past confirmed that some of the released hostages are going to be dead, but they never said who specifically it's going to be. Marco, anything you'd like to say on this part?
Well, there's not much more to say, to be honest. I mean, when Hamas says, "Oh, the hostages died," well, hang on a second. These bodies were living people who were alive on October the 7th. Hamas and the Palestinians went into Israel, kidnapped them, and murdered them. And now they're returning the bodies as sign of peace and or trying to make peace. It's like, honestly, the fact that the Israeli government goes for it is just frankly repellent. But to be honest, having accepted the stupid deal, having accepted the compromise with Hamas, now if you don't take the other hostages and you start war again, you're going to be accused of being, effectively having sacrificed the hostages. So Israel, Netanyahu's government put itself in an impossible position, which they could have avoided by going into Gaza decisively from the 8th of October 23. But that's where we are, unfortunately.
I think, many of us have known really in our hearts and minds, to be frank, that there was a low likelihood that the Bibas children would have survived to this point, no matter how much you hold that hope high. And of course, because we value life, as do Israelis, you really hope that you're wrong on that aspect. But if it seems that we're not, then it does come as no surprise. It does represent what Hamas is. And of course, it represents what Hamas is, that they kept it from the father as well. And they released the father early on in the process, but made sure that they told him nothing and that, nothing else. It was deliberately kept as a manipulative tool to maximum psychological effect for as long as possible by the people who killed the babies. Now, if that doesn't readjust, even for those people in the West, how they look at this when they're so constantly talking about babies within Gaza, and yet the amount of times that you see the Bibas babies covered within the British media is so limited. It's been so tiny. It's been, I've seen Palestinian kids plastered all over the BBC website constantly. I only ever see the Bibas children as a tiny collage occasionally when we're talking about a hostage release. And it's when it's talking about a hostage release, not when it's talking about hostage capture in the first place. So it's sad, but it's not desperately surprising, I'm afraid. And of course, the fact that they're going to release some live hostages according to the plan some days later, and the largest amount they've released in some time, some days later, again, is part of the how do we get over, how do they release the dead hostages and then counter that by releasing some live ones in a larger number a few days later. Well, that's again part of Hamas trying to temporarily rehabilitate itself within the eyes of the West, within the eyes of its cheerleaders in our UK government and European governments and all of their cheerleaders on the streets of London, New York.
Yeah, I think with the 4 dead bodies and 8 living hostages, it might actually be that they are planning, and I've seen some reports about planning to release pretty much the rest of the hostages of the first phase. Now, again, first phase was only 30 something that were supposed to be released over the period of 42 days. So this would sort of be on time with that. Something I'd like to mention because we might uh, learn more about why they are dead, and something that might come about is, you know, it is possible, and it happened in the past that then it was Israeli strike that killed the hostages or some Israeli action. Now, just in case that does come happen, it's important to remember those people wouldn't be in those places if not for Hamas uh, kidnapping them and putting them in those places, as well as we know um, Hamas is keeping the hostages all over the place, doesn't tell Israel where they are, and doesn't let any international body to look at them, doesn't provide them with any access. The worst criminals in Israel are treated better than the hostages held in Gaza. Um,
Well, right now, the worst criminal held by Israel are released in exchange for these innocent people. So, that's even worse.
But yeah, now kind of hard, but let's try to return to Egypt. Now, something something to mention is that since the last plan or sort of a deal that Trump thought about, or specifically the fact that some Palestinians should be relocated to Egypt and Jordan. Now, since Trump had made the statement, LCC has refused to go to the White House. If that is like part of the things that are going to be discussed. And I've seen some reports that he might go to Saudi Arabia. Now, in Saudi Arabia, there should be a meeting between Americans and Russians to sort of set up, let's say, basically first talks about what's going to happen in Ukraine. So he might be there. But yeah, I think this goes to the greater point of the fact that Egypt is even viewed as like any sort of respectable partner, any sort of nation that we can sort of like negotiate with, since Egypt is considered not necessarily as ally, but as one of the nations that does recognize Israel, that recognizes Israeli independence, basically since the 1979 Israeli-Egyptian peace deal that has been de facto normalized relations. Now, uh, and what to say even about that. I mean, it shows the sort of really bad state of the world and Israel. The fact that just because some nations recognize the independence of Israel, now they are viewed as like a equal partner. I mean, specifically with Egypt, as I think Marco you've said earlier, it's one of the biggest, or rather, it's at the top 5 or in the top 5 of the recipients of foreign aid from America. It basically receives, or at least in 2023, it received about half of the aid that Israel did. So it was 1.7 billion. Now again, it's just a random Arabic authoritarian country that is receiving aid. Now the purpose of the receiving aid is, or at least sort of the officials are that, Egypt is a key negotiating partner when it comes to even this deal. A lot of the negotiations happen in Cairo. So similar to Qatar, it's viewed as like our bridge to the Middle Eastern world. One part of it is, of course, the 1979 treaty, as well as the counterterrorism effort and a certain amount of diplomatic leverage. The fact that we can threaten with, "Oh, we'll stop giving you money." So now we have like an advantage because we can take away the money we're giving to them, as well as the access to Suez, which is a whole another thing. The fact that Egypt even owns the Suez. But yeah, Marco, what do you make of sort of the the way the West or America looks at Egypt as an ally in some sense, or a sort of like our bridge to the
Yeah.
Middle East?
Well, Egypt is the result of the policy that the West has been taking towards the Middle East for for over a century now, probably. Egypt is the most moderate of the Muslim state. They don't seem to have those kind of fanatic lunatics that you find in nearby states, which is a good thing, but the problem is that what problem is I think the reason is because Egypt has been, although part of the Ottoman Empire since the early 1800s, actually was more or less independent. So they kind of developed their own sort of government and the sort of structure, so the sort of culture. And of course, from the 1880s until the 60s, 50s, 60s, 50s, 50s.
1952, I think
Yeah,
it was.
52, yeah. It was under direct control of the British Empire. So it's been civilized a bit. It's been historically closer to the Western civilization that all the other states have. And unfortunately, just pouring money to the states in order to keep them quiet seems to be the policy that we follow. And of course, the fact that Israel has been at war with them, it's not necessarily a good partner in order to come to a table with Egypt. However, this time there is a different reason why the two states are talking to each other again, or they're trying to talk to each other. It's because of the change of the U.S. administration. Since Trump has been making the noises he's been making. He's been threatening Hamas of releasing hell. He's been making the point that we should evacuate Gaza of Gazans. People around have been listening. That's why we have the accord. That's why Hamas accepted the accords in the ceasefire accords in the first place, because they were threatened by the new president. And at the same time, by proposing the Gazans plan, Trump has effectively taken up a change in policy, significant change in policy. He's moved away from the two-state solution. Um, Signaling he wants a single state controlled by Israel. So obviously, every Arab state in the area is kind of pecking up their ears, and it's like, well, hang on a second, what do? We don't like this, so they come up with an alternative solution. But it's all reaction. It's not that they particularly feel love towards the Gazans. Let's not forget the Egypt itself refused to take Gaza back from Israel for obvious reasons, because that's the kind of people you don't really want among your people, especially if you're a bit more civilized than they are.
I think it is part reaction to Trump's plan, but it's also part recycling, since it's always had a significant nature of this Arab plan anyway, particularly when the Palestinian Authority is trying to be often worked in there as those that would run Gaza. Now, depending on which report you read and exactly what is within what is at the moment, a skeleton idea of a plan, even on the Egypt side, and exactly the kind of thing that the kind of body that would run it, and of course enforce the law within the Gaza Strip under such a plan. I mean, you're talking about the Palestinian police, who are the former PA police who stayed in Gaza after 2007. Now, I mean, I read that sentence and I think, well, I mean, you've been living under or with or part of or facilitating Hamas since 2007. So are we supposed to believe that these people are completely neutral and to be trusted? And then, of course, you're talking about Egyptian police being involved as well, or Western trained police, whatever that means. Um, and then in terms of the administration of Gaza, again, exactly which body or which group taken from which former bodies would form the administrators of it. And again, are you going to pretend that they can rewrite their own virginity simply by saying we weren't members of that club last week, so we're therefore fresh faces, when clearly they're not necessarily fresh faces at all. So I mean, all of that's in it. I think in terms of the aid stuff, I mean, the figure I read was 1.3 billion from the US. That related to the military side of the aid, but on top of that, which probably takes us nearer the 1.7 you mentioned, is the economic aid and the kind of humanitarian style aid as well. And those figures aren't always easy to come by. And previous administrations have often held back some of that money for reasons such as human rights violations. They've used as a reason to hold it back to try and encourage, you know, better treatment of Egyptians. Now, whether that's there's many things you could say about that, but whether that works, whether that's right, whether that's exactly what we mean, whether that's just leverage, whether that's threats, all of that is in there. And of course, but Biden certainly allowed at the end of his presidency the full money to go out there because, of course, he was trying to make sure that Arab nations got as much money as possible at that point, I think, in line with certain other presidents in the past. So, what can we say in the conclusion of this? Except that it's not yet known exactly what's going to happen. There's likely to be a first conference of a Gaza reconstruction conference with a bunch of different countries. Already, Egypt has been speaking like on the sidelines of the Munich conference to various European nations. France will always want its paws in there as early as possible, and has already made some considerable noises together with Germany. So, and those, the agenda of those nations is sometimes more just to counter whatever America's doing and to try and be its own, its own power in its own right, regardless of whether it's right or wrong, whether it would simply want to counter the US sometimes. And then, of course, you've got the Arab nations like Qatar and UAE involved as well. So all of that can pollute the end result, quite honestly.
You mentioned the Munich Security Conference. First, I'd like to kind of apologize because I called it a NATO summit, I think a few days ago, so I made a mistake there. If anybody wants to come after me, now they can't because I said I'm sorry.
But to be fair, I think it was just something at the periphery of the NATO summit, so it wasn't totally off.
Was there an actual? I think it's supposed to be somewhere else, a NATO summit, or
Well,
it's like a.
Well, the former Dutch Prime Minister, who's now the chief of NATO, was there as well. So there was a bit of a conference between the Europeans to address Russia, but also later on as Richard pointed out, it was a kind of offline discussion between Germany and France and Egypt.
Yeah, I see the official NATO summit should be in June in Netherlands. So maybe some part of it, but like the official thing is supposed to be in later this year. Although there is actually a special thing called in Paris in the I'm not sure if upcoming days or something by President Macron, which hosts only few European nations to basically because Trump has now camp in Saudi Arabia to discuss with Russia. We have to do the other cool kids club in here, uh, um, which is a separate. Maybe we can later or a different episode talk about that. But now, yeah, going back to Egypt now. Yeah, I mean, this whole idea of like again trying to negotiate with Egypt, trying to find certain ways, again talks about the broader policy of basically not wanting to actually do with these nations with the way you're supposed to deal with these nations. I mean, this is you had many times when Egypt attacked Israel, and every single time Israel kicked Egypt's butt pretty much, and then pretty much gave in to some some peace agreements to basically say, well, okay, take back Sinai, and we'll like have peace and something. But again, you cannot deal with these nations like that because they do not fundamentally want to prosper. They do not fundamentally want to have some sort of freedom with Israel or some sort of peace with Israel. The number one goal is always to fight against the West, and Israel is the closest representation of it, and that's what they're focused on. And this is important to remember even when it comes to rebuilding Gaza, because Gaza doesn't only need to be rebuilt on the physical level, but on the spiritual level, the people there want to kill Jews, and that's the only thing that matters to them right now. And that cannot be changed with we just send some money there, or we just have some amount of rebuilding or some amount of repair. There has to be like a fundamental change there. Now, Egypt used to own Gaza, where they didn't even give them full citizenships. They didn't even consider them full citizens, and they didn't really do anything with it. Now, when Israel took it, Israel also really botched the occupation, and it didn't do what was necessary as it did after the War of Independence. But the I think I still take my chances with either Israel taking over Gaza or whatever Trump comes up when it comes to his plan for Gaza, then doing the same mistake as in the past, basically just giving Gaza back to Arab nations, to different Arab nations, if it means giving it back to Palestinian Authority or some sort of international body where Egyptians, Saudi Arabians, Jordanians are all play some role, or even different nations, different Arab nations. The fact is that there needs to be a fundamental change in Gaza, and only or the only possible place it can come out is the West or some Western nation with proper understanding of Western ideas and proper understanding what occupation requires. And this cannot come from any of these nations. So, Marco, what do you make of, yeah, as we said, the Egyptian plan came out sort of suddenly and as a sort of like thing, well, we actually do have our own plan for what to do with Gaza that we didn't deliver since October 7 or since the first time there have been first talks about what's going to happen with Gaza.
Yeah, I mean, all they're terrified about the fact that Gaza might not be full of Palestinian and available for destabilization of the area for the next decades. That's why they came up with this plan, which, by the way, includes a stupid, idiotic clause that would stop Israel from initiating any kind of engagement for 10 years. So these people would like the Israeli to effectively say, "Oh, we're not going to defend ourselves for 10 years." I mean, that's just the idea of that. You must be an idiot to come up with this. But what surprises this is Egypt with Jordan, Saudi Arabia, UAE, and of course Qatar. Qatar, the state sponsor of Hamas, the state sponsor of Al Jazeera, who's spreading Islamic hate across the region. So are we surprised that they come up with this kind of plans? And of course, the thing I really dislike about these two suggestions, both from Trump and the Egyptians, is that in the end, the Palestinians go into Israel, slaughter Jews, butcher 1,000 people, take 250 hostages, kill children, and then they're rewarded with new nice houses to live in and new lives. It's like, no, I'm sorry, you're gonna be under Israeli occupation until you learn to be civilized people. You stop and abandon your ideology of genocidal craziness, and you start behaving like human beings. You cannot reward these people with this kind of promises, or oh, we're gonna give you a better area, we're gonna give you a better house. It's like, no, you're gonna be there and build every single thing you've allowed to destroy because you're a bunch of maniacs. It's just absurd that these people would be allowed to leave Gaza. To be honest, Israel has been accused of running an open air prison, turn it into an open air prison until these people are rehabilitated properly. There's no other way. There's no other way to change these people.
I mean that 10-year guarantee that Israel would not resume fighting in Gaza. I think of that as the tie the hands clause of the Israelis, and because I mean that's clearly what it is. And of course, there's no suggestion at the moment of some sort of other clause in there that would prevent Gazans from or Palestinians from attacking Israel, of course. And even if there is, they're never treated in the same way anyway, as we saw in the full 20 years from the disengagement to October the 7th. Um, and then there's a couple of other proposed clauses, which are, there's the naivety clause, as I think of it, which is it's going to give jobs to Gazan population to help rebuild the Gaza Strip. And that suddenly they're going to become bricklayers and running plumbing and electrics. Well, we saw what kind of plumbing and electrics they do in the past. They've done it underground in the tunnels and all that. So I would think it would be absolutely vital in any reconstruction of Gaza that there is a thorough and constant assessment of what is being built above ground and what is not being built below ground, and any hint of anything being built below ground should instantly, render the whole thing void, even if it got as far as that. And then there's the sort of human shield clause, or whatever you want to call it, which is that having 3 safe zones, allowing the Gazans to live in supposedly areas of Gaza during this 6-month recovery period, whilst they simply squat there in order to declare it's still ours, as they would do as part of the second phase of the ceasefire deal, which is to ensure that the IDF leaves Gaza. That's the main purpose of that second phase. Of course, it's also in theory to mean the return of all the hostages, live or dead, of course, and that there will be an enduring end to the war. Now, again, you could call that one the naivety clause as well, to be honest. But those are the suggestions, and none of that is particularly fresh. And of course, how is that different from a two-state solution in all but name, and especially if the Palestinian Authority, in all but name, will be the ones running it?
Yeah, and as with everything, you cannot rely on these nations such as Egypt, Jordan, or any other Arab nation, any other, or I shouldn't say Arab, any other authoritarian nation to sort of have any expectation of actually fulfilling the deal. Or even when it comes to international organizations, we had UNIFIL in southern Lebanon that did nothing about Hezbollah for over a decade. Um, Now, someone says, the many IDF soldiers I have spoken to do not want this. Let them leave. Who cares if it looks like a reward? They will never escape their misery. So I think there are two sides of it. One, and you could even compare it to, let's say, Ukraine when it comes to sort of driving Russia completely out of their land. It's I can understand if there are people who simply do not want to fight anymore, but there is a reality of there will be more violence in the future if you do not finish it now. Now, I understand that it's definitely hard to go to an IDF soldier and basically say now you have to occupy Gaza and basically rehab. That is a word there that I cannot pronounce right now, but sort of like reform Gazans it is truly like hard to realize, but then it needs to be said that the only way out is occupation of Gaza and making sure this doesn't happen again. Uh, Now, sometimes the right things are tough, and but it's important to also remember that the reason why we're here is because of the failures of the past. The fact that Gaza was already occupied by Israel, and Israel refused to do, after the Six-Day War, to do what needs to be done when it comes to occupation, to properly set it up for future. And now they're suffering the consequences of it, which is definitely sad for the IDF soldiers who have to sort of suffer, or they are the sort of the first direct consequence of these actions, is the fact that they have to fight it. But of course, every single Israeli citizens will suffer from it. Every single Israeli citizen, even the non-IDF people who got kidnapped on October 7, who were attacked on October 7, who were had a rocket dropped in their area, or inside of Israel by Hamas, by Hezbollah, by Iran. Um, but with that, Marco, any last thoughts on this, and also
Well,
where people to find you?
I see the point of, they're tired of fighting. Of course they are. We are tired of seeing them putting their life at risk as well. I mean, that's not enjoyable. But the occupation wouldn't be fight, would be literally making sure that the Gazans haven't got the freedom to redo the things they've been doing for the last 20 years. As Richard pointed out, they wouldn't have the freedom to build the war machine that they built and prepare the kind of attack that they've perpetrated on October 7th. So it wouldn't be an active combat situation, it would be just keeping the peace, making sure that the Gazans behave like human beings, which is very difficult, to be honest. It's a difficult task because only the other day, for example, in Greece, two Israeli tourists were attacked by a Gazan. A Gazan in Greece, of course, you let these people out, and what do? They do exactly what they were doing in Gaza itself. They behave like animals because that's the kind of ideology that they have. They grew up for 70 years. They've been told you're a special case, you're a special kind of refugees, you're a child of refugee, even if they don't live in Gaza anymore and they are second, third generation, they are still refugees. They still have this kind of special, holy, um, um, aura around them that nobody can touch it because, oh, my great granddad was in Gaza in 48. Well, sorry, you cannot accept something like that. You cannot allow these people to go around and spread the hate that they've been living for the last 80 years.
Yeah, just to jump in quickly, when we talk about occupation of Gaza, this is not some sort of like a revenge plan that like they've then done bad things and now we have to like give it back. It's to ensure the security of future Israelis and present Israelis that are still alive, and to ensure that Israel as a state is secure and doesn't have a terrorist organization sending rockets over the border.
Yeah, and the final aim of the occupation would be to integrate the Gazans in the Israeli society, or at least make them civilized to the point where they understand that they cannot go around murdering people just because they're Jews.
And of course, I think just on the point about Athens and the events in Greece there that Marco was referring to with the Gazan attacking two people, I think part of the motivation for some of the European nations, let's be honest about it, is not having 2 million Palestinians flooding into Europe and the dangers of terrorism, etc., that would lead to, as this would be an example of. And I think that's that's got to be said. There's a couple of other things I just wanted to mention, which was what one was who builds it in terms of the construction of the big contracts, the international contracts for constructing it, and just as importantly, who funds that building. Because that is a big question mark over this. And I did read in the article that we looked at, one of the articles in preparation for this, international donors would not contribute if Hamas was in charge. Yeah, okay, that's a low bar threshold to say the least. Of course, if you just swapped Hamas for some other organization that has the same ideology or at least a better PR front to the same ideology, you're not going to get a different result. You're going to get the same result in the end. You're going to get the aid and funding of Western nations supporting its own demise in the end. The very sanction of the victim that Ayn Rand spoke about. So, and of course, who's going to get the international construction contracts? There's obviously a lot of talk within it's an Egypt plans. Obviously, Egypt has got its name up there at front to get a chunk of those. And of course, a phrase as wide and vague as that can mean just about anything. And without any detail, we can't say much more about it other than that would need some considerable examination as well. But all of that ends up relating back once again to buildings and schools and hospitals and infrastructure, which is not the point. The point is, what do the people think who wherever they're going to live? What is their attitude? What is their ideology? What is their philosophy? And what is the means in which they're going to act on that philosophy? Because if that continues to be the annihilation of Jews wherever they encounter them, to whatever extent they can get away with, whilst receiving funding to do more of it from Western countries, then we are in the same cycle, just in a slightly geographically altered format. But otherwise, nothing would change. And that's the last thing any of us want.
Where can people find you?
You can always check out the Briefly Objective. Link is in the description below for shorter content. You can find content there, which is the short versions of our conversations on this channel with added visuals just to make the point really clear. Please like and subscribe to that, and of course this show as well.
Someone in the chat says hopefully love wins. So ending with the words of Lex Friedman, love is all we need. So thank you everybody for watching. We'll be back tomorrow with another episode of the Daily Objective and the reality show, and we'll be continue watching it as well as definitely continue seeing what's gonna happen with especially the dead bodies that are going to be released. That it's supposed to be on Thursday, so but we might get more reports in the meantime. So thank you again, guys, for joining me today. Thank you everybody for watching, and bye bye.